The only thing that I can think that's actually easy to start is a box of donuts. Books definitely aren't. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. You can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. How do you begin your book? Starting and ending a book are probably the hardest parts of the book because the middle of the book is just logical steps from the beginning to the end. But the beginning and the end need to be different than the middle in some sense. It's not just connecting things logically, it's creating an impression on the reader or something like that. It's putting a limit on the story that's being told, whether that limit is put on the front of the story or put at the end of the story. And I don't know if the beginning is more important than the end, but it definitely is important because it sets up the character, the setting, and draws the reader in, hopefully. But what is the ultimate purpose of the first line of a book? Is it to set up the character or the scene? Is it to draw in the reader? I think there's one reason that goes beyond these different things. I think something more complex is happening when we're writing the first sentence of a book. I think of it more like the beginning of a song. I think you as a writer are trying to make an impression on your reader in a similar way that the musician is trying to make an impression on the listener with the first notes of a musical piece. And I might even say that we should view that first instance, that first sentence, as the thing that transports the reader to another world. I don't know if that helps anybody when they're deciding to write the first line of their book. Maybe it does. I think that's a good way to look at it. I think that if we shift our mindset from this idea that we're trying to grab the reader with that first line, or we're trying to set up a story, or we're trying to set up the scene, that we're going to be writing differently and that we're going to be more relaxed when we're writing. If you have the intent to grab the reader, you're going to fall into what I call being a poser writer, where you try so hard to be clever with the beginning of your book that you actually make the beginning of your book somewhat absurd or a caricature of what writing really is, of what good writing really is what I mean. And I think we fall into a similar issue when we think of it as setting up a character or a setting. Any place you're in has millions of different details, and what details should we begin on and where should we end with our descriptions of that place? And the same thing is true of a person. A person is made up of probably billions, if not trillions, of different details. And the question is, what detail should we start on and when should we end describing that person? Now, you may contend that the first line of a book, being a portal that transports the reader into another world, will just make us fall into the same errors again. So maybe what I mean will be best understood in another way. I'm not just trying to transport the reader into another world. I'm trying to transport the reader into another consciousness. I'm trying to get the reader to look through different eyes. I'm trying to make the reader buy into this idea that they are going to take on the role of the hero in the book. They are putting on the mask. They are going through the steps that the hero is going through. They are experiencing those things vicariously through the reading of the book. So thinking of our first lines in that way, how do we approach the beginning in this sense? How do we approach the beginning with this idea that we are going to be placing the reader in the body of the main character? There are many different correct ways, but one particular strategy that I've seen applied across many different beginnings that has been effective is the strategy of keeping the focus narrow. The first line of your book needs to stay simple. The first line of your book does not need to explain the entire world of the book. It doesn't need to explain the entire person of your main character. It doesn't need to explain the unique thing that is within your book either. It can take on one of those ideas. It can take on multiple of those ideas. But the idea of narrowing the scope is something I've talked about in another episode as well. So check out that episode up here if you're listening, or check it out down below if you're on audio. This idea of narrowing your scope is thinking of the smallest thing you can write and conveying that idea. And this applies to the beginnings as well. The way you do this is that when you're thinking about how to start your book, you think of the entire story. You think of the theme of that story. You think of the main character. You think of what you're trying to convey with that story, whether you knew you were trying to convey it or not. And you try to find that one thing that explains your entire story in a single sentence. And if you can find that one thing, and you can epitomize your story in that single sentence, then you'll be able to write the beginning in a way that fits extremely well. This is similar to my ideas with world building and having a limiter. If you are world building and you do not have something that naturally limits your world building will never end. In the same way, if you focus on your story and what your story is about as you're trying to find the first sentence and the first paragraph and the first page of your story, you are going to be limiting what you can actually do with that first sentence, first page, first chapter, etc. And by limiting your choices, you're going to be able to find the best one better. You may be thinking, because I've given advice that's a little different than this in the past, you may be thinking, why would I want to limit my choices? Why wouldn't I want to have every single choice possible? In some cases, when you're writing your first sentence, that may be good. But if you're someone who spent hour upon hour upon hour trying to find out how you should start your story, it is going to be extremely helpful to limit your options in some way. And if that limiter also helps you connect back to your story, that is another huge plus, because your story always needs to be cohesive. Your story always needs to be cohesive and hang together in a logical way. If you enjoyed this, you're probably wondering how you can support me. Well, you can actually do two simple things. Follow the first link below to grab a copy of my book, and then follow the second link and sign up for my newsletter. It's that simple. Those two things will mean the world to me and give me more time to write books and create content for you. As always, my name is Daniel Poppie, and this is How to Write Good.